Susie, Dave Romeo here. Please let Jackie Childs know he has a phone call. Tell him it's from me. Hello, Jackie. I just wanted to give you an update that Peter Frampton was at it again. He accosted me on the street the other day. He's a bit of a nut job, and I think he's waiting to beat me up. Oh, he's mad because I used the lyrics to one of his songs in an upcoming episode. He shoved me in the shoulder, but I used this Chinese bomb one of my friends, the maestro, gave me. Who put the bomb on? I put the bomb on. Well, I also have this bruise in my face where he smacked me. So do you think we have a case? My face is your case? That's great, Jackie. Listen, I gotta go. My next coaching client is here and I have to let him in. Bye. All right, you sit right there and we can get started. Oh! Sweet fancy Moses. That's gotta hurt. I don't care where you're from. My Lord, I wonder how you're feeling after your terrible ordeal. I don't know about you, but there's ringing in my ears from that unbelievable storm, and I almost feel like there's no one to relate to except the sea here in Dover, which seems to be mocking your terrible plight. After the Duke of Cornwall brutally gouged out your eyes with his thumbs, you're probably thinking to yourself, who can I believe in? And I don't blame you. If you want to pray, I'm all in favor of you kneeling on the floor, but let me give you some hope and peace of mind. There has to be justice, and there is. As we speak, a force is coming from France led by Cordelia to right these terrible atrocities. Who do I think can best help you? Well, that would be your son Edgar. I know you think he's trying to harm you, but he was set up by your illegitimate son Edmund. I realize that you can't see them, yet the stars are out and shining, and help is on the way. But all I really want to know is, will you trust me enough to ask Edgar for help? Well, I can see no reason to keep you in the dark, so to speak. I feel I'm going to shock you when I tell you that there has to be a good explanation why Edgar tried to fool you and to play this part of the madman Tom of Bedlam. Well, with all this to take in, you're probably thinking to yourself, I wonder if I'm dreaming. I feel so unashamed. I can't believe this is happening to me. Well, I, for one, am sorry to say that it is. Oh, my dear Gloucester, won't you show me that you haven't lost your will to live? Good. I know that's the best way to regain your sanity. Are you open to my advice? Yeah? Then go to your good and loyal son Edgar and say to him, my son, I want to live. I want to go back home, and I want you to show me the way. No pun intended.
All right, Romeo, that's it. Open up right now.
Peter Frampton?
I've had just about enough of you, Pinhead.
First of all, please don't call me Pinhead. And second, how did you find my studio?
Let's just say an old drummer mate of mine who is in an all-star band I played in told me.
Ringo!
That's right, and I told you what would happen if you used one of me songs in such bad taste.
Well, why did you have to bring your talk box with you?
I want to spank you.
What did you say?
I said I want to spank you.
You're saying you want a piece of me?
I could drop you like a bag of dirt.
You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts! Give me that talk box! Peter Frampton is a dangerous lunatic.
Oh, stop being such a baby.
You're a baby!
You're a baby.
Don't worry, folks. Despite my appearance, I assure you, I don't need no doctor.
I told you to stop using those bloody song title puns already.
Well, it looks like I busted him up as much as he did me. So I only have one question for you. Do you feel like we do? Oh, it's just a guitar pick. What a relief. For a second there, I thought I lost a tooth. In the 1967 Beatles song I Am the Walrus, John Lennon included dialogue from a BBC radio broadcast at the end of the song. I remember hearing the lines, "Oh, untimely death, a serviceable villain. What, is he dead? And sit you down, father, rest you," unaware at the time of the source. It wasn't until years later that I learned that these lines were actually taken from Act 4, Scene 6 of King Lear, making it my first introduction to this play. So let's take a look at the plot. Act 1 opens with the Earl of Gloucester introducing his illegitimate son Edmund to the Earl of Kent. We learn that the elderly King Lear of Britain wants to retire from the active duties of running his realm, so he decides to divide his kingdom among his 3 daughters based on how much they say they love him. His eldest daughter, Goneril, speaks first and declares her love for her father in excessive terms. Thus, Lear grants Goneril and her husband, the Duke of Albany, her share immediately. He similarly awards Regan and her husband, the Duke of Cornwall, her share right away after she's spoken. However, his youngest and favorite daughter, Cordelia, refuses to shower her father with insincere flattery like her sisters and simply says, "Nothing, my lord," stating that she loves him according to her bond, no more and no less, and will reserve half of her love for her future husband. Lear is infuriated by Cordelia's response and disinherits her. He then divides the entire kingdom between her 2 older sisters. The Earl of Kent confronts Lear about his unfair treatment of Cordelia, but Lear becomes enraged and banishes him from the country. Next, Lear then summons the Duke of Burgundy and the King of France, both of whom have proposed marriage to Cordelia. But when the Duke of Burgundy learns that Cordelia has been disinherited, he withdraws his suit. However, the noble King of France recognizes her sincere honesty and marries her nonetheless. He criticizes Lear's decision because up until this time, Lear has always praised and favored Cordelia. Lear decides that he'll alternately live monthly with Goneril and Regan and their husbands. He also retains 100 knights to be provided for by his daughters. When Cordelia and the King of France leave, Goneril and Regan speak privately and declare that they believe their father is a foolish old man who cannot be taken seriously. Gloucester's illegitimate son Edmund resents his status and plots to dispose of his legitimate older half-brother Edgar. He dupes his father with a forged letter into believing Edgar plans to kill him and usurp his estate. Meanwhile, the Earl of Kent returns from exile in disguise, calling himself Caius, and Lear unwittingly hires him as a servant. At Albany and Goneril's house, Lear and Kent get into a quarrel with Goneril's steward Oswald. Lear discovers that since Goneril now has power, she no longer treats him with respect. She tells him to cut his retinue in half. Outraged, Lear leaves Regan's home. Lear's fool reproaches him for his foolishness in giving away everything to Regan and Goneril and anticipates that Regan will treat Lear just as poorly as Goneril did. In Act 2, Edmund learns from a courtier named Curin that there's going to be a war between Albany and Cornwall and that Regan and Cornwall are going to Gloucester's house that evening. Edmund fakes an attack by Edgar, and Gloucester, who's completely fooled by Edmund, disinherits Edgar and labels him an outlaw. Kent brings Lear's message to Regan and once again quarrels with Oswald in Gloucester's home. As a result, Regan's husband Cornwall puts Kent in the stocks. When Lear arrives, he's furious about Kent's mistreatment, but Regan dismisses her father just as Goneril did. Lear is outraged, but he realizes that he's powerless to do anything about the situation. When Goneril arrives, she supports her sister's argument against their father, and Lear flies into a rage. He hurries out into a storm to ran against his ungrateful daughters, accompanied by the mocking fool. In Act 3, Kent follows after Lear and tries to keep him safe. Gloucester is repulsed by Lear's mistreatment. Since Lear's 100-knight retinue has been disbanded, Lear's only companions are his fool and Kent, whom he still doesn't recognize. The three wander around on the heath in the storm and encounter Edgar, pretending to be a madman named Tom of Bedlam. Edgar babbles wildly, and Lear denounces his daughters and begins acting out in real madness. Kent finds a hovel and leads them all to shelter. Kent tells a gentleman that the French army has landed in Britain in an attempt to reinstate Lear to the throne. He also asks the gentleman to give Cordelia a message while he continues to look after King Lear on the heath. Meanwhile, Edmund learns that Gloucester is aware of France's impending invasion and betrays his father to Cornwall, Regan, and Goneril. After Edmund and Goneril leave to warn Albany about the invasion, Regan and Cornwall have Gloucester arrested and gouge out his eyes. In the tussle, one of Cornwall's servants comes to Gloucester's defense and fatally wounds Cornwall. Regan kills the servant and tells Gloucester that it was Edmund who betrayed him. She sends the blinded Gloucester out to smell his way to Dover. In Act 4, Edgar, still pretending to be a madman, meets his blinded father on the heath. Gloucester doesn't recognize his son's voice and begs him to lead him to a cliff at Dover where he plans to jump to his death. Goneril realizes that she's more attracted to the duplicitous Edmund than she is to her good and honest husband Albany, whom she considers to be cowardly. Albany is disgusted by the evil sister's treatment of Lear and Gloucester and denounces his wife. Goneril sends Edmund back to Regan, but after learning of Cornwall's death, she fears that her newly widowed sister may pursue Edmund for herself and sends him a letter through Oswald. Meanwhile, Kent leads Lear to the French army, which is under the command of Cordelia. But Lear is still half mad and extremely humiliated by his earlier behavior. Kent and Cordelia take charge of Lear, whose madness quickly passes, and the two reconcile with one another. At Regan's insistence, Albany joins his forces with hers against the French. Goneril suspects Regan's motives, and Regan rightfully guesses the meaning of her sister's letter and tells Oswald that she's a better match for Edmund. At the same time, Edgar pretends to lead Gloucester to a cliff, then changes his voice and tells Gloucester that he has miraculously survived a great fall. Lear is now completely mad and rants about how corrupt the world is and runs off. Oswald enters while looking for Edmund and, acting on Regan's orders, tries to kill Gloucester, but is instead slain by Edgar. Edgar finds Goneril's letter in Oswald's pocket, which encourages Edmund to kill her husband and take her as his wife. In Act 5, Regan, Goneril, Albany, and Edmund meet with their forces. Albany agrees to fight the French invaders, but insists that they do not harm Lear or Cordelia. The two sisters vie for Edmund, who's made promises to both of them. He also plans to have Albany, Lear, and Cordelia killed. The still disguised Edgar gives Goneril's letter to Albany. As the armies battle, the Britons defeat the French, and Lear and Cordelia are captured. Edmund sends the two of them off with secret orders for Cordelia's execution. The victorious British leaders meet, and the newly widowed Regan proclaims that she will marry Edmund. But Albany exposes Edmund and Goneril's conspiracy and declares Edmund to be a traitor. Regan, who's been poisoned by Goneril, staggers and is escorted off stage where she dies. Edgar appears masked and in armor and challenges Edmund to a duel, although no one knows who he is. Edgar mortally wounds Edmund, but he doesn't die right away. Albany confronts Goneril with the letter she intended to be his death warrant. She flees off stage in shame and rage. Edgar uncovers his face and reveals that Gloucester died from shock and joy after Edgar revealed himself to his father, who was relieved that his son Edgar was alive. Since Goneril's plans have been prevented, she commits suicide. The dying Edmund remorsefully decides to try to save Lear and Cordelia, but his confession is too late. Albany sends men to revoke Edmund's orders, but Lear enters carrying Cordelia's body in his arms after killing her executioner. As Kent appears, Lear finally recognizes him. Albany urges Lear to resume his reign, but the trials Lear has experienced prove to be too much for him, and he dies. Albany then asks Kent and Edgar to take charge of the throne, but Kent declines, saying that his master is calling him on a journey and he must follow. Thus, Albany and Edgar are left to restore the kingdom. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable characters in King Lear. A very learned colleague of mine, who happened to give me that bust of Shakespeare, once said that 400 years from now, people will still be discussing King Lear. And while I'm sure that's true of all of Shakespeare's plays, I believe Shakespeare's incredible characters will have a lot to do with validating that statement. King Lear, who lived about 800 years BC, is the king of Britain and has been ruling for about 60 years. He's old, he's tired, and he prefers to turn his kingdom over to his 3 daughters so that he could just, as he puts it, crawl towards death. Unfortunately, instead of just dividing up his kingdom 3 ways, he decides to do so based on how much each of his daughters say they love him. His 2 eldest daughters, Goneril and Regan, flatter the king with false adoration, but his innocent youngest daughter, Cordelia, doesn't want to play their game. Unfortunately, she answers nothing to the king's question, and in a fit of rage, he disinherits Cordelia, who is taken anyway by the King of France to be his wife, saying that she herself is a dowry. Lear then divides his kingdom between the 2 eldest daughters and their husbands, the Dukes of Albany and Cornwall, respectively, and in another fit of rage, he banishes the loyal and trusty Earl of Kent, who speaks out against his ridiculous decision to disinherit Cordelia. The Earl of Gloucester has 2 sons. His eldest is Edgar, who is legitimate, loving, and naive, and his illegitimate son, Edmund, who is evil, treacherous, and cunning. Edmund convinces his father through forged letters that Edgar is trying to kill him. Gloucester is duped into believing him and disinherits Edgar, promising to leave everything to Edmund. I do want to say something about the noblest character in the entire play, who's not even given a name and appears in only one scene. As the Duke of Cornwall is gouging out Gloucester's eyes, one of the Duke's servants fatally wounds him in an attempt to stop him from carrying out this horrific act, but is mortally wounded by Regan. And finally, we have Lear's Fool, who provides more wisdom and insights than humor in this virtually humorless tragedy. As with many of Shakespeare's plays, the Fool is responsible for some of the wisest lessons in the entire work. In Act 1, Scene 4, the Fool tells Lear these words of wisdom. "Mark it, nuncle. Have more than thou showest, speak less than thou knowest, lend less than thou owest, ride more than thou goest, learn more than thou trowest, set less than thou throwest, leave thy drink and thy whore, and keep and adore, and thou shalt have more than 2 tens to a score." In Act 1, Scene 5, Lear's Fool tries to get through to him about his poor judgment and delivers my favorite line in the entire play. The Fool says, "If thou wert my fool, nuncle, I'd have thee beaten for being old before thy time." Lear asks, "How's that?" And the Fool replies, "Thou shouldst not have been old till thou hadst been wise." And finally, in Act 1, Scene 4, the Fool teases Kent, who is sitting in the stocks and is a captive audience. "When a wise man gives thee better counsel, give me mine again. I would have none but knaves follow it, since a fool gives it. That, sir, which serves and seeks for gain, and follows but for form, will pack when it begins to rain, and leave thee in the storm. But I will tarry, the fool will stay, and let the wise man fly. The knave turns fool that runs away, the fool no knave per die." Kent asks, "Where learned you this, fool?" And the Fool aptly retorts, "Not in the stocks, fool." When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes in King Lear. Once again, we're going to start off the plot devices section with letters of correspondence. In this particular case, we have Edmund pretending to conceal forged letters to convince his father Gloucester that his legitimate son Edgar is planning to kill him. Gloucester is completely taken in by this ruse, by the way. Later on, Edgar intercepts letters from Goneril to Edmund, plotting against Albany's life, and their evil plot is prevented. The storm in this play is described as a tempest, which we've already seen occur just before the beginning of Twelfth Night, the night before the assassination of Julius Caesar, the night of Duncan's murder in Macbeth, and the night of Marina's birth in Pericles, Prince of Tyre. And before the play even begins, we learn of the tempest in the Comedy of Errors, and obviously, let's not forget, the Tempest. In King Lear, the storm is designed to strip Lear of his dignity and lay him naked to the elements and the truth. Illegitimacy is an important aspect of this play because Edmund uses it to defend his evil nature, just as Richard III used his deformities as his justification for becoming a Machiavellian-like villain. And of course, there's also the illegitimate Don John, who claims to be a villain in Much Ado About Nothing. But then again, you have other less menacing illegitimate characters, like the cynical Thersites in Troilus and Cressida, the harmless Bastard of Orleans in Henry VI Part 1, and the noble Philip Falconbridge, a.k.a. Richard Plantagenet, in The Life and Death of King John. And once again, we have a case of banishment. Kent is banished at the beginning of the play for speaking up for Cordelia, even though he returns in disguise to protect King Lear. Of course, Arcite also sticks around after he has been banished in The Two Noble Kinsmen. Romeo returns after his banishment in Romeo and Juliet. Henry Bolingbroke returns from banishment in Richard II. Posthumus returns from banishment in Cymbeline, and Lucius, Alcibiades, and Coriolanus all return after banishment to seek revenge on their former homelands in Titus Andronicus, Timon of Athens, and Coriolanus respectively. As far as memorable scenes go, let's take a look at 3. First, we have Act 3, Scene 2, in which Lear, his fool, and Kent are caught out on the heath during a terrible storm, and Lear slips into madness, which is accelerated after they encounter Edgar, who pretends to be Tom of Bedlam, a mad knave who rants long passages of gibberish that Lear thinks are brilliant. It's one of the most disturbing scenes in the play, which is saying a lot considering how disturbing the next scene is. In Act 3, Scene 7, we actually experience the barbaric cruelty towards the helpless Earl of Gloucester, who's tied down in a chair in his own house, while the Duke of Cornwall gouges out his eyes with his own fingers. Were that not enough, he's egged on by his wife Regan to finish the job and kick Gloucester out of his house and let him smell his way to Dover. I realize this is a tragedy, but is this really entertainment? And finally, in Act 4, Scene 6, we see Edgar lead the blinded Gloucester to a cliff in Dover, but mercifully prevent him from killing himself. The two encounter Lear, who by this point is quite mad, and the scene is as memorable as it is depressing. When we return, we'll look at some of the major themes that run through King Lear. There are numerous themes that run through King Lear, but let's just focus on madness, nakedness, and blindness for the moment. Lear starts off being mad or angry at both Cordelia and Kent for challenging his expectations of them. Two of the characters are actually driven mad, Lear himself and later Gloucester after being blinded by the Duke of Cornwall. You can hardly blame either of them, considering Lear's disrespectful and dismissive treatment by his two eldest daughters, and Gloucester for being tied down in his own house and having his eyes gouged out for trying to protect the dejected king. Edward feigns madness in order to protect his own life, and yet his madness is seen as genius by King Lear. The nakedness in this play has nothing to do with sensuality or eroticism. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's ugly, disturbing, and unattractive. Its purpose is merely to strip bare all of the pretenses of rank, followers and nobility, and to show us the baseness of human existence. It's only after Lear is stripped down to nothing on the heath that he can understand how the homeless, the wretched, and the meek are left to fend for themselves with no aid from their monarch. Through his nakedness, Lear finally gains an awareness of what it's like to be left unprotected, as he was willing to leave Cordelia and Kent. The theme of blindness is very powerful in this play and is contrasted with the ability to finally see and acknowledge the truth. Gloucester starts off completely blinded to the evil intentions of Edmund and cannot see that his son Edgar has always remained loyal to him. King Lear is blind to Goneril and Regan's blatant flattery of him and gives away his kingdom to his undeserving and ungrateful daughters, who turn their backs on him as soon as he's been left powerless to fight back. Lear is also blind that Caius is actually his loyal and trusty servant Kent until the very end of the play, and Gloucester is blind that his loving son Edgar is the one who befriends him on the heath. There's no shortage of resentment in King Lear. Lear resents Cordelia and Kent early on, and Goneril, Regan, and Oswald soon after. Goneril and Regan resent Lear for making them wait for their inheritance, Cordelia for being their father's favorite, and eventually each other for being rivals for Edmund's affections. Goneril resents her husband for not supporting her evil ways. Kent resents Oswald for being a disrespectful lackey, and Edmund resents his brother Edgar for being the legitimate heir to Gloucester's fortune. But there's also some charity in this play, although it's not as abundant as the resentment. Kent, Gloucester, and Cordelia all show charity towards Lear. The King of France shows charity to Cordelia after she's been disinherited by her father. In Act 1, Scene 1, the King of France calls out Lear for disinheriting Cordelia, who's trying to speak honestly to her father and not feed him with false flattery like her two older sisters had. The king says to Lear, "This is most strange, that she that even but now was your best object, the argument of your praise, balm of your age, most best, most dearest, should in this trice of time commit a thing so monstrous to dismantle so many folds of favor. Sure her offense must be of such unnatural degree that monsters it, or your forevouched affection fall into taint, which to believe of her must be a faith that reason without miracle could never plant in me." Edgar also shows charity to his blind father Gloucester, and Albany shows charity to Kent and Edgar at the end of the play. When we return, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines in King Lear. Even the most avid lovers of King Lear will admit that this play is extremely depressing. However, there's no denying that much of its endurance and acclaim is due to the incredible lines it contains. Indeed, I would be doing you an injustice if I included all of the great passages in this section, because they're best appreciated by reading or hearing them yourself. But let's review a few of them together. In Act 1, Scene 2, Edmund has a magnificent soliloquy about why his illegitimacy should not make him any less worthy a soul than a legitimately born son. By the way, you'll hear the word nature mentioned several times in these sections. Nature is mentioned 44 times in this play. "Thou, nature, art my goddess. To thy law my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom and permit the curiosity of nations to deprive me for that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother? Why bastard? Wherefore base? When my dimensions are as well compact, my mind is generous, and my shape as true as honest madam's issue. Why brand they us with base, with baseness, bastardy, base? Base, who in the lusty stealth of nature take more composition and fierce quality than doth within a dull, stale, tired bed, go to the creating a whole tribe of fops got between asleep and wake. Well then, legitimate Edgar, I must have your land. Our father's love is to the bastard Edmund as to the legitimate." Fine word, legitimate. Well, my legitimate, If this letter speed, and my invention thrive, Edmund the base shall top the legitimate. I grow, I prosper. Now gods, stand up for bastards. In Act 1, Scene 4, we see King Lear lash out at his daughter Goneril for treating him so shamefully, saying, "Hear, nature, hear, dear goddess, hear. Suspend thy purpose if thou didst intend to make this creature fruitful. Into her womb convey sterility. Dry up in her the organs of increase, and from her derogate body never spring a babe to honor her. If she must teem, create her child of spleen, that it may live and be athwart disnatured torment to her. Let it stamp wrinkles in her brow of youth, with cadent tears, fret channels in her cheeks, turn all her mother's pains and benefits to laughter and contempt, that she may feel how sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child." In Act 3, Scene 7, we see one of the most barbaric scenes in any Shakespeare play, the blinding of Gloucester. Regan and her husband, the Duke of Cornwall, almost seem to spar with one another to see who can be the most cruel in their torturing of an old man while he's bound in a chair and must endure their evil actions. First, Regan shocks us after her husband has gouged out one of Gloucester's eyes, saying, "One side will mock the other too." Cornwall says, "If you see vengeance," but he's stopped by his servant who says, "Hold your hand, my lord. I have served you ever since I was a child, but better service have I never done you than now to bid you hold." And after he's killed by Regan, Cornwall says, "Lest it see more, prevent it. Out, vile jelly. Where's thy luster now?" In Act 4, Scene 1, Gloucester laments, "As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport." In Act 4, Scene 6, Gloucester, recognizing Lear, says, "The trick of that voice I do well remember. Is it not the king?" And Lear says, "Aye, every inch a king. When I do stare, see how the subject quakes. I pardon that man's life. What was thy cause? Adultery? Thou shalt not die? Die for adultery? No, the wren goes to it, and the small gilded fly does lecher in my sight. Let copulation thrive, for Gloucester's bastard son was kinder to his father than my daughters got 'tween the lawful sheets. To it, luxury." Luxury in that time meant lechery. "Pell-mell, for I lack soldiers. Behold yon simpering dame, whose face between her forks presages snow that minces virtue and does shake the head to hear of pleasure's name. The fichu nor the soiled horse goes to it with a more riotous appetite. Down from the waist they are centaurs, though women all above. But to the girdle do the gods inherit. Beneath is all the fiends. There's hell, there's darkness, there's the sulphurous pit. Burning, scolding, stench, consumption. Fie, fie, fie. Give me an ounce of civet, good apothecary, to sweeten my imagination. There's money for thee." Gloucester says, "Oh, let me kiss that hand." And Lear says, "Let me wipe it first. It smells of mortality." What a great line. In Act 4, Scene 7, King Lear is finally reconciled to his daughter Cordelia. He says to her in humility, "Pray, do not mock me. I am a very foolish, fond old man. 80 and upward. Not an hour more or less. And to deal plainly, I fear I am not in my perfect mind. Methinks I should know you, and know this man. Yet I am doubtful, for I am mainly ignorant what place this is. And all the skill I have remembers not these garments, nor I know not where I did lodge last night. Do not laugh at me, For as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child Cordelia. Cordelia answers him, and so I am, I am. Lear asks, be your tears wet? Yes, Faith. I pray, weep not. If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me. For your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause. They have not. To which Cordelia replies, no cause, no cause. And finally, in Act 5, Scene 1, we hear Edmund in another soliloquy musing over what he should do about Regan and Goneril, who both desire him, yet he remains pragmatic at best and disinterested at worst. He begins, to both these sisters have I sworn my love, each jealous of the other as the stung are of the adder. Which of them shall I take? Both? One? Or neither? Neither can be enjoyed if both remain alive. To take the widow exasperates, makes mad her sister Goneril, and hardly shall I carry out my side her husband being alive. Now, then, we'll use his countenance for the battle, which being done, let her who would be rid of him devise his speedy taking off. As for the mercy which he intends to Lear and to Cordelia, the battle done, and they within our powers shall never see his pardon. For my state stands on me to defend, not to debate. When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points in King Lear, as well as some of the correlations to the other Shakespeare plays. Before we begin looking at the major turning points, please note that there are some significant differences between the quarto text and the folio text of King Lear. For example, 300 lines were removed from the earlier work, and 100 lines were added to the latter. In addition, the scenes and acts vary from one version to the next, so if you're having trouble locating a scene, check with the other version. Because of the way the play is structured, several key turning points take place at the very beginning of King Lear. For example, in Act 1, Scene 1, Cordelia has the opportunity to explain to her father that she loves him dearly, but not because she wants any of his land from him. Unfortunately, when asked what she has to say, she simply says nothing. When Lear says nothing will come of nothing, she misses the opportunity once more to clarify her meaning, and in doing so loses her share of her father's kingdom. Also, in that same scene, Kent gets banished by King Lear for trying to talk some sense into him. However, had Lear the clarity to listen to Kent's wise counsel, he could have saved himself a lot of grief by not allowing his two eldest daughters so much free rein and control of his kingdom, and at least he would have had Cordelia to stay with if the other two turned against him. In addition, he would have had Kent by his side, who was a strong leader, and would have easily been able to use Lear's knights to keep the evil sisters in check. Next, in Act 1, Scene 3, the banished Kent returns in disguise as Caius to look after Kent and to summon Cordelia as to what has taken place. It's only through his intervention that France is able to join the fray and get Albany's attention that King Lear and Cordelia need saving. Had Kent not returned, Lear probably would have gone mad and died in obscurity. Of course, he still goes mad, but at least we know what happened, and he has the opportunity to reconcile with Cordelia. And finally, in Act 4, Scene 5, Edgar intercepts Goneril's letters from Oswald on the heath and delivers word to Albany about the plot in his life. If not for his actions, Edmund could have gotten away with Albany's murder and possibly become the next ruler of Britain. But now let's take a look at some of the correlations between King Lear and the other Shakespeare plays. In Act 1, Scene 1, we see that Earl of Kent is wrongfully banished, but returns not in vengeance, but out of pure love for the king who banished him. Of course, if you know anything about Shakespeare's plays, as a rule of thumb, it's never a good idea to banish anyone who can come back and destroy you. For example, in Titus Andronicus, the powerful warrior Lucius is banished by Rome, makes friends with his former enemies, the Goths, and they agree to join him and destroy Rome. In Coriolanus, the powerful title character and warrior is banished by Rome and goes to his former enemies, the Volsces, who also agree to back him and destroy Rome. In Timon of Athens, the powerful warrior Alcibiades is banished by Athens and returns with a powerful army to destroy his former homeland. And in Richard II, Henry Bolingbroke is banished from England and returns with an army and usurps Richard and becomes king. Now, sometimes you can get off easy. In The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Valentine gets banished and lives in the forest. In The Two Noble Kinsmen, Arcite disregards his banishment orders and stays in Athens because he's in love with Amelia. And in As You Like It, Rosalind and Duke Sr. use their banishment to lounge around in the forest of Arden without bothering anyone. You also have the rare exception when someone you banish returns and winds up helping you, like Posthumus does in Cymbeline. But just remember, you can banish somebody in one play and they can come back and cause you trouble in another. For example, Thomas Mowbray seemed to go away quietly after being banished in Richard II, but returned in Henry IV Part I as a traitor against the king and eventually had to be executed. And then we have Queen Margaret, who was banished in Henry VI Part III, but decides to stick around to curse just about everyone in Richard III because they didn't have the good sense to dispatch her when they had the chance in the first place. So the takeaway lesson on banishment is this. If you really want to get rid of somebody, you're better off beheading them than banishing them and hoping that they don't come back. Well, I'm glad we cleared that up. Cordelia tells her father that she needs to save half of her love to give to her future husband, the same argument that Desdemona makes to her father Brabantio in Othello. At the beginning of the play, King Lear divides up his land and his kingdom. In Henry IV Part I, we see Owen Glendower, Worcester, and Hotspur dividing up their lands. King Lear overreacts to both Cordelia and Kent in the very first scene of the play, just like Leontes overreacts to his wife Hermione and his best friend Polixenes in the first scene of The Winter's Tale. Edmund intentionally pretends to conceal his forged letters, which pique Gloucester's curiosity to find out what they say. In Richard II, O'Merle tries to conceal his letter, spelling out a plot on the king, but his father, the Duke of York, spies the letter and insists on reading it. In Romeo and Juliet, Friar Lawrence's letter to Romeo goes undelivered due to a plague. In The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Valentine's concealed letters are intercepted by the Duke of Milan, thwarting his elopement plans with Silvia, the Duke's daughter. In Love's Labour's Lost, Barone and Don Armado's letters both go astray thanks to the clown Costard, and in Henry VIII, Cardinal Wolsey inadvertently puts his letter to the Pope in with his letters to the king and is undone by them. Edmund forges letters to convince his father that his brother Edgar is plotting to kill him. Also, Edgar kills Oswald and intercepts Goneril's letters to Edmund about their plan to kill Albany. In Hamlet intercepts Claudio's letters and forges them so that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are executed when their ship arrives in England and not Hamlet. And in Twelfth Night, Maria forges a letter in Olivia's hand in order to play a prank on the haughty Malvolio and take him down a peg. Edmund reveals his ambition in an early soliloquy, saying that because he's illegitimate, he must resort to villainy. In Much Ado About Nothing, Don John, the illegitimate brother of Don Pedro, says he's a plain-dealing villain who can't help who he is, and in Richard III, the title character blames his ambition and villainy on his deformity. At the beginning of the play, the 80-year-old Lear says he's turning over the kingdom, quote, while we unburdened crawl towards death, unquote. At the end of The Tempest, Prospero says that once back in Milan, he'll retire, quote, where every third thought shall be my grave, unquote. By the way, the same actor who played King Lear also played Prospero in The Tempest in the BBC Shakespeare series. In Act 2, Scene 2, the fool sings, "The rain, it raineth every day." In Twelfth Night, Feste the Jester also sings, "The rain, it raineth every day." King Lear turns his kingdom over to his daughters. In The Tempest, Prospero leaves the running of his kingdom to his evil brother. In Pericles, Prince of Tyre, Pericles leaves the running of Tyre to his trusted noble Helicanus. In Measure for Measure, Duke Vincenzo turns over Vienna to the wicked Lord Angelo, and in Henry VI, Part 3, Henry turns his kingdom over to Warwick and Clarence. In Act 1, Scene 2, Edmund says, "This is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we are sick in fortune, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and stars." In other words, people blame their misfortunes on the stars. However, he goes on to say, "I should have been that I am, had the maidenliest star in the firmament twinkled on my bastardizing." And so he seems to be in agreement with Caius Cassius in Julius Caesar, who said, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings," meaning, take responsibility for your own success. In Act 4, Scene 2, Goneril says, "Oh, the difference of man and man," as she compares her husband Albany to Edmund. In Act 2, Scene 1 of The Two Noble Kinsmen, the jailer's daughter says, "Lord, the difference of men," as she compares the wooer to Palamon. And in Act 1, Scene 2 of Measure for Measure, Mistress Overdone compares Lucio and his companions to Claudio, saying, "There's one yonder arrested and carried to prison was worth 5,000 of you all." Cordelia has to choose between two suitors and winds up marrying the right one, just like Amelia does in The Two Noble Kinsmen. In Act 5, Scene 3, we learn that Goneril is dead after having confessed that she poisoned her sister Regan. At the end of Cymbeline, we learn that the queen is dead after having confessed that she was poisoning Cymbeline. There are also some biblical correlations. Some are more obscure than others, so let's just look at the most obvious one. In Act 4, Scene 3, Cordelia says, "O dear Father, it is thy business that I go about." That sounds very similar to the Gospel according to St. Luke, chapter 2, verse 49. When the Blessed Mother asks Jesus why he has caused St. Joseph and her to seek him for the last 3 days, Jesus replies, "How is it that you sought me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" And finally, in the Star Trek animated television series in 1974, the penultimate episode was entitled "How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth," which was about an alien being that demanded to be worshipped. The title, of course, was taken from none other than Act 1, Scene 4 of King Lear. When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts about King Lear. In preparing to do this episode, I did extensive research, and this is what I found. There are actually two distinctive plays about King Lear attributed to William Shakespeare. The first one is referred to as The History of King Lear, which is referred to also as the quarto version, and was published in 1606. The Tragedy of King Lear, which is most commonly referred to as the First Folio version, was published in 1623. The second version has 300 lines cut from the original play and adds 100 new lines. Also, as I mentioned, the scenes vary from version to version, making it sometimes difficult to locate specific lines. A major source of this work was the second edition of the Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland by Raphael Holinshed, published in 1587. According to Holinshed, the story is set when Joash was king of Judah, which would make it around 800 years BC, so it's obviously in the pre-Christian era. This has resulted in numerous anachronisms, such as Anglo-Saxon names such as dukes and earls being used, and you couldn't have a king of France then, since France wasn't even a country at the time. In addition, in Act 3, Scene 2, the fool says, "This prophecy Merlin shall make, for I live before his time." It's almost as if Shakespeare is letting us know that he did this deliberately and is aware of the anachronism, since Merlin hadn't even been born yet and was first introduced in 1130. Another anachronism has to do with the name Edgar chooses when he's pretending to be the madman called Tom of Bedlam. This term originally referred to a patient of an English mental institution which is known today as Bethlehem Royal Hospital, St. Mary Bethlehem, or Bedlam, and is located in Bromley, London. The hospital didn't even start operating until 1330, so it would have been familiar to Shakespeare's audiences, even though it definitely didn't exist 800 years BC. In addition, Shakespeare drew from a fictitious story entitled Lear of Britain, spelled L-I-E-R, who was a mythological Celtic king. This story is recounted in the pseudo-historical book History of the Kings of Britain by a Catholic cleric, Geoffrey Monmouth, which was written around 1136 AD. The only known performance of the play during Shakespeare's lifetime was on December 26, 1606 at Whitehall before the court of King James I. During the 17th century, the play was considered so disturbing, depressing, and unsatisfying that in 1681, Nahum Tate wrote an alternate version of the play with a happier ending in which King Lear lives and Cordelia and Edgar marry, which was substituted and used for about 157 years before audiences returned to the original tragic version in the 19th century. The name Albany refers to the ancient name for Scotland. Cornwall refers to the southwest region of England, and the name Cordelia means the heart. The term nuncle, which the fool keeps saying when he's speaking directly to Lear, is a Middle English word meaning uncle. If you've ever seen the 1965 film The Sound of Music, you'll know that there's a song in there entitled How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria?, in which Maria is described as, among other things, a flibbertigibbet. This is another Middle English word that means gossip. It's also one of the terms Edgar uses when he's attempting to be Tom of Bedlam and spewing gibberish. It's the only other time I've ever heard this term used. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, some of the lines from a radio broadcast were recorded and mixed into the Beatles song I Am the Walrus. Apparently, John Lennon happened upon the play on the BBC Third program in 1967 while fiddling with the radio and working on the song. However, he said that he didn't find out until years later when someone told him that the broadcast was from King Lear. Some of the actors who have gone on to play the incredibly emotionally, physically demanding role of King Lear have been Orson Welles, Laurence Olivier, Charles Laughton, Paul Scofield, Sir John Gielgud, Lee J. Cobb, Christopher Plummer, Sam Waterston, Derek Jacobi, Ian Holm, Ian McKellen, Anthony Hopkins, and Kenneth Branagh. And finally, in the 1990 film The Godfather Part 3, director Francis Ford Coppola deliberately incorporated elements of King Lear into the film, such as Michael Corleone's attempt to retire from his criminal empire, which throws it into chaos, and having Michael's daughter die in his arms at the end. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable actors in the 1982 BBC Shakespeare version of King Lear. All right, now let's take a look at some of the remarkable actors in the 1982 BBC Shakespeare version of King Lear. Norman Rodway, who plays the Earl of Gloucester, also played Apomantus in Timon of Athens in 1981, and Cleon of Tarsus in Pericles, Prince of Tyre in 1984. John Shrapnel, who plays Kent, also played Alcibiades in Timon of Athens in 1981, Hector in Troilus and Cressida in 1982, Duncan, Seaton, and an Old Man in Kenneth Branagh's version of Macbeth in 2013, and Camillo in Kenneth Branagh's version of The Winter's Tale in 2015. John Bird, who plays the Duke of Albany, played the pedant in The Taming of the Shrew in 1980, and the painter in Timon of Athens in 1981. Michael Kitchen, who plays Edmund, played both Antipholus of Syracuse and Antipholus of Ephesus in The Comedy of Errors in 1983. The magnificent Michael Hordern, who plays King Lear, played Capulet in Romeo and Juliet in 1978, Prospero in The Tempest in 1980, LeFou in All's Well That Ends Well in 1981, and Jupiter in Cymbeline in 1982. And before that, he played Baptista alongside Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton in the 1967 version of The Taming of the Shrew, and Senex in the 1966 film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum with Zero Mostel and Michael Crawford. Brenda Blethyn, who plays Cordelia, played Joan La Pucelle, a.k.a. Joan of Arc, in Henry VI Part 1 in 1983. Penelope Wilton, who plays Regan, also played Desdemona in Othello in 1981. Harry Waters, who plays the King of France, also played Biondello in The Taming of the Shrew in 1980, and Phidias in Antony and Cleopatra in 1981. Tim Brown, who plays the Captain, also played a servant to the Lord Chief Justice in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, both in 1979. Peter Walmsley, who plays the third servant, also played a servant to Troilus in Troilus and Cressida, and an officer in Othello, both in 1981. Frank Middlemass, who plays the Fool, also played Pompey Bum in Measure for Measure in 1979, and Bishop and eventually Cardinal Winchester in Henry VI Parts 1 and 2, both in 1983. George Rao, who plays the Doctor, also played Sir Thomas Erpingham in Henry V in 1979, Paulina Stewart in The Winter's Tale, and Euphronius in Antony and Cleopatra, both in 1981. And finally, Anton Lesser, who plays Edgar, played Troilus in Troilus and Cressida in 1981, Feste the Jester in the 1988 Kenneth Branagh version of Twelfth Night, Sir Thomas More in the Wolf Hall TV series, and Exeter in the Hollow Crown BBC series. Now, stay tuned for today's trivia challenge, which is called Overnight Accommodations. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called Overnight Accommodations. Identify the Shakespeare plays in which the following places of interest are mentioned and their significance. Number 1, the Inn of the Garter. Number 2, the Centaur in Ephesus. And number 3, the Elephant in Illyria. When we return, I'll have the answers for you, and we'll wrap up with some relevant lessons from King Lear. All right, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called Overnight Accommodations. You were to identify the Shakespeare play in which the following places of interest are mentioned and their significance. Number 1, the Inn of the Garter. It's where Falstaff lodged in The Merry Wives of Windsor. Number 2, the Centaur in Ephesus. It's where Antipholus and Dromio of Syracuse lodge in the Comedy of Errors. And number 3, the Elephant in Illyria. It's where Sebastian lodges in Twelfth Night. Now, let's wrap up with some relevant lessons from King Lear. First, take personal ownership for your own success. Edmund says that people blame his illegitimacy for his actions, but he knows that he would have been a villain no matter how noble his birth. Lear's problems began when he decided to retire. Kings don't retire. They have a duty to honor and a responsibility to maintain. You are the sum of your decisions, and if you want to retire, make sure that you have a clear succession plan in place before you need it. Second, seek first to understand and then to be understood. How many problems could we avoid if we just took the time to learn the facts without jumping to conclusions? Be slow to anger and eager to gain wisdom. And finally, remember that trust must be earned and continuously re-earned at every opportunity. Trust people only to the degree to which they continuously re-earn your trust. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. There's nothing left except for the series finale, so please join me next time when an orphaned young maid wins a reluctant husband and a French king's debt is paid.